everyone, welcome to the hip thrust tutorial, a very full tutorial here for you, so pay attention and let's go. So first off, I want you to have about a 12 to 14 inch platform is usually the sweet spot for most people to do hip thrust. I'm about 5'5", 5'6", and 12 to 14 inches is perfect for me. You can use plyo box, you can use risers, there's different things that you can use as long as they're stable, and let's start with that. So you can use a standard bench. Most of these are about 18 inches. I'm going to show you how you would use that a little differently because it's not necessarily ideal, but sometimes the only thing you would find in a commercial gym. Okay, so the basics to the hip thrust here. So I'm being hit right under my shoulder blades, so that's a perfect position for me. My feet are about hip width apart. I'm going to keep my chin tucked slightly and my eyes forward the entire time. So I'm going to press up through my heels, never the toes, through the heels, hips fully extend, my eyes are forward, and I'm squeezing my glutes on purpose. I'm going to come down. The movement starts from here, right under the ribs. So you'll see that up here, I am not moving. It's just coming from right below my ribs. So above the ribs, I do not move. Fully extend, squeeze the glutes, eyes forward, and feet are about hip width apart. So this is how the hip thrust is going to look. Also want you to note that I don't want you to push off with your arms or your elbows. So you can put your arms in or your hands in a fist if you like. Just make sure that you're not pushing off with anything except your heels, hips extend, squeeze the glutes. Now I'm going to add some load to this hip thrust, and assuming you're at around at least 65 pounds and have these tall plates, we'll get into more if you're using small plates. But right now my legs are underneath. I'm going to use this squat sponge. I got this on Amazon. I want you to pay attention first to the knurling of the bar and how you can see that it's centered. Bring it centered across your hips. I'm going to put my squat sponge on, and by the way, this thing always needs to be opened at the top so that it doesn't come undone when you're trying to hip thrust and cause you pain. So right over your hips, centered with the knurling. And going to lean back. I'm being hit right under the shoulder blades. Feet hip width apart. Come up, squeeze the glutes. Eyes look forward. And again, the movement is happening from my ribs down. And I'm not pushing off with my arms. One thing I want you to note is that leg position matters where your knee bend is. So ideally, you want to come up and have 90 degrees. If your feet are too far back, okay, you're going to feel that more in your quads likely. And if they're too far forward, you're going to feel that in your hamstrings. So setting up to where basically your knee is over your ankle, and that's about where you want to be. So think about that. Foot position matters, leg position matters. So I want to give you a better visual of what it looks like at the top of the hip thrust. So for that, when you do extend your hips at the top, I want you to think about this posterior pelvic tilt. This is posterior pelvic tilt. The glutes are squeezed tight. And this is anterior pelvic tilt. So you have a little curve in the back and your butt sticking out still. I don't want this position at the top of a hip thrust. I want you to think about bringing the hips to full extension and tucking the pelvis slightly, squeezing the glutes. Not the prettiest of looks, but to get that full range of motion and glute activation in the hip thrust, going to be very important. Now, I did mention that if you have a bench that's not ideal height, this one is about 18 inches, that I want to show you also how to set up on that. So what you're going to do here is go ahead and find the bottom of your shoulder blades and then go ahead and get set up there. And so now you will not go all the way down to the floor or as close as you did before with the lower bench, but now I'm going to come up, squeeze the glutes, keeping those eyes forward. So same form, just showing you that you don't have to go it doesn't look like you're going as far. You're getting that range of motion, but that's how you would set up on a bench that's a little bit too tall. Depending on where your hip thrusting setup can be a little more challenging, and I just want to show you what can you do if you're hip thrusting but you're not quite ready for the tall plates, so you can't just roll it over your legs and start hip thrusting. So what you're going to do, I have 5-pound plates on either side, so my bar is very close to the ground. I'm just going to stand up. I'm going to bring this bar close to my legs, and I'm going to keep a flat back and simply deadlift the bar. Now I'm going to carefully sit down, make sure that the knurling and the bar is centered over my hips. And with that, I'm gonna roll it up to my hips, and I'm going to shimmy down a little bit carefully with a hand on the bar and use my arms to kind of get in position until I meet the back of my shoulder blades, and then I can hip thrust from here. Just like that. And when I am done, use my arms a little bit more, come up, and then I'm done hip thrusting. So while 18 inches is probably not ideal for this hip thrust, it can be done, and that's just to give you a little insight. And if you have smaller plates that you cannot roll just across you, simply deadlift the bar, sit down with it, and then you can hip thrust. I want to show you another option to the hip thrust. The hip thrust is great, but if for any reason you simply can't do that, I want you to get, everybody's done like a glute bridge before, so where your feet are in front of you, you come up, squeeze the glutes. Same movement as the hip thrust. Your body's just lying on the floor instead. So what you're going to do is simply roll this bar over you at your hips, making sure it's centered. Bend here at the knee, come up, squeeze the glutes. Make sure, of course, you're still getting that full hip extension. And then to get up, you'll just roll the bar down, and there you have the glute bridge from the floor.